Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Haven, which is episode 10 of season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I will cover the Next Generation episode Haven. So Haven is the episode where Counselor Troy is arranged to be married to this friend of the family, and so her mother, Roxana, who's very eccentric, arrives on the ship and creates a lot of chaos. But then there's also this deal with a vessel from a plague planet where there's very few people left approaching this paradise planet called Haven, and it turns out that Counselor Troy's groom-to-be, Wyatt, was actually in some sort of psychic contact with a woman from the plague vessel, and so he beams over there in order to devote his life to finding a cure for these people, and they all go off on their merry way. So, first, before I get into this episode or my views of it, I want to do a little housekeeping, a little administration, because those who are familiar with my channel, who's watched my reviews of Star Trek the original series, would probably note that I reviewed the episodes in order of production. That is, the order that they were made, not the order that they were aired. And I made several videos. I talked about this maybe 5 or 6 times as I covered the original series, of why it is and why I think it makes total sense. And I think if you're going, one is to watch Star Trek the original series, they should watch it in production order, which makes me kind of furious that the streaming services show them in air date order, because I think that makes no sense. However, so I'm bringing it up now because if one is aware of the difference between air date and production order in Star Trek Next Generation, one might notice that I am in fact covering Next Generation in air date order, not production order. So I'm bringing this up in this episode in particular because this it's probably the episode that is most out of order. As in production order, this is episode 4. But in air date order, it's episode 10, which is why I'm reviewing it as 10. So it was made, so first episode made was Encounter at Farpoint, then Naked Now, then Code of Honor, and then it was this one. Whereas an air date, Lost Outpost was aired after Code of Honor, and then despite the fact that Where No One Has Gone Before was actually made before Last Outpost. So it's kind of all out of order, well, for this first part of the season anyway. And apparently, and I've read this online, I don't know if this is still true or not because I don't watch Voodoo, but apparently Voodoo does show them in production order. Now, one might ask why I'm being inconsistent. Why would I review Star Trek the original series in production order and a Next Generation in air date order and ignore the production order? So I made my arguments, as I mentioned, multiple times on the original series and why it's kind of jarring to not watch it in production order, especially season 1. And it makes more sense to watch those episodes. And I think it mainly applies to season 1, kind of a little bit to season 2 because of Chekhov's stupid wig. But I mainly remained in production order with season 2 and 3 of the original series in order to remain consistent. But with TNG, it's actually the other way around. And there's in most cases, air date order actually makes more sense than production order. Now, as far as like these episodes go, I don't think it really makes a difference. I think some people pointed out how they think this episode Haven, for example, you can tell it's an earlier episode, and so even though it's the 10th episode to air. You can tell is only the 4th one to be made, and you can tell is a bit the characters aren't there yet. But I haven't noticed that. It's certainly not as big of a deal as the original series where No Man Has Gone Before, where they're all like wearing different weird colors and shit, and there's different characters there. But the more to the point is when it does make a difference in Next Generation, whether you watch it or air date or production order, it actually makes more sense to watch an air date order, which is different from the original series where it made way more sense to watch in production order. Here, it doesn't, because there's a few examples, like the biggest one is Symbiosis and Skin of Evil. In production order, they're out of orders because Skin of Evil is the episode in which Tasha dies, and Tasha appears in Symbiosis. Now, production order, they actually filmed Skin of Evil first, and then they filmed Symbiosis, but that actually, they never intended to be viewed in that way. They always intended Symbiosis to be aired first, because it makes no sense to watch Tasha Yar die and then all of a sudden she's alive in the next episode and then you never see her again. And apparently Voodoo actually had it in that order. They had Skin of Evil, then Symbiosis, which is confusing. And another example of this in TNG is in the 5th season, the two-parter Unifications, Part 1 and 2. In production order, they actually filmed Part 2 first and then filmed Part 1. This had to do with Leonard Nimoy's schedule because Leonard Nimoy was only in Part 2. And he apparently was available, for the earlier time slot. So they filmed Part 2 first and then filmed Part 1. So you definitely don't want to watch Part 2 and then Part 1. And also, in Season 3, I believe the first 2 episodes of that season were swapped. I think the first episode to be made for Season 3 was Ensigns of Command. But the first episode to air was Evolution, which was the second episode made for Season 3. But Evolution makes way more sense to be the premiere of Season 3 since they address the fact that Dr. Crusher has returned to the ship. And she was gone in season 2, and it appeared again in Season 3, so it makes way more sense to watch it in that order. So, even though you might say it's inconsistent from the original series to the Next Generation, I stand by it because you gotta judge each show on its own merit, on its own context. In the context of TOS, it made no sense to watch an air date order. In the context of TNG, it makes no sense to watch it in production order. So, I am consistent to what makes the most sense. And actually, from here on out, I will be going by air date order from the rest of the shows. DS9, Voyager, and all that. I don't even know the difference between production and those shows. But anyway. Plus it's also easier because when I was watching 2S and production order, since all the streaming service has an air date, I had to have my list of what the production order is and flip around to each episode, where now I can just go with the flow and let Paramount Plus show me the order that they want to. Anyway, that's enough talk about that. Let's get into this episode itself. And yeah, I'm gonna have to be a little bit contrarian, a little bit controversial again, because I've seen a lot of hate for this episode. I kind of like it. I kind of like this episode. To me, this is one of the sort of better episodes of earlier season 1 of TNG, which was full with a lot of bad episodes. It is the first appearance of Luoxana Troy. And I will have to say, and I say this every time I cover a Loxana and Troy episode, because I've heard the opinion from multiple people that Loxana Troy was much better in Deep Space Nine than she was in TNG. That opinion, of course, is empirically incorrect. It is wrong. I'm being facetious, but anyway, I just think she's way better in TNG than DS9. Like this episode, as I say, I kind of like it. I didn't really mind her in this episode. Where I would say she had 3 appearances in Deep Space Nine, and the 4 worst, really terrible Loxana Troy episodes, 3 of them are her Deep Space Nine appearances. The other one is Manhunt, the season 2 episode, which that was horrendous. But most of her other TNG appearances, I think, are either decent or actually really good, which I'll get to with episodes like Dark Page and Half a Life. And then there's episodes like Cost of Living, which I thought was kind of funny. It was okay, just like this episode. This episode's okay. Menage a Troy, also okay, which I know, again, a lot of people despise that episode. I thought it was fine. And I thought this episode was fine. So, there's this whole arranged marriage thing with Wyatt, and of course it's ridiculous because you know that Troy's not going to leave the ship, but it's still interesting, and it's an interesting concept, and I actually like the character of Wyatt. I think he's actually really interesting, particularly when, Riker was pointing out how jealous he was, and he was going to, and talk about, how jealous he was, and Wyatt was kind of either indifferent or oblivious to it. he either noticed but tried to dismiss it, or didn't even notice. I think he was willfully ignorant. I think he did notice but was trying to be like, oh, whatever. He's just so non-threatened, so didn't care about it, which I kind of like that. I like the way he was like, so you're the one who wants to be a starship captain. Well, good luck with that ambition. Like when Riker was trying to say how jealous he was, that's all he said. And just how he was like, and then he went on the joke about how his father was practicing naked. I kind of like this character. And I kind of like what they do with this character. I like the storyline with the Terralians. This plague ship. It is a bit weird how everyone's treating them very hostile. And Picard talks about people who try to eradicate them and wipe them out wherever they go. But then you learn that sometimes they did try to inhabit a planet, and they would just infect everyone there, and they would all die. So I don't know. I don't really have an issue with it. I think that actually makes a bit of sense. And I do like how Picard sort of threads the line with the planet Haven, which, to be fair, we're told over and over again how it's a big paradise, but we're not shown any of the goddamn planet, which is a bit frustrating, but, that's the budget of early TNG for you. Not much they can do. You do see Picard talking to the leader of Haven. You see in the background out the window some nice ocean or whatever, but that was probably filmed somewhere in California. But anyway, so yeah, I like how Picard has to sort of, Haven was begging him to destroy the ship, but of course he didn't want to kill unnecessarily and wanted to save them. I thought that was really interesting. And I really like the resolution where Wyatt beams over the ship. I actually thought that was kind of touching. I thought that kind of made sense. Now, I start to realize, I didn't notice this before, but the whole thing about how Wyatt was dreaming of this woman and the woman was dreaming of Wyatt, the way it was described, I always just went with it, but the way it was described was kind of similar to the New Age beliefs talked about in Where No One's Gone Before. When I covered that episode, I talked about how there was a way of Roddenberry to slip in his New Age beliefs. And this is another example. And this one actually got by me. I didn't notice it. But they were saying that, everyone in the universe is connected. It's just that Wyatt and this woman are sort of more open to that possibility, which is why they were able to form a connection. Which, if you ask me, is a bunch of hocus pocus nonsense, but this is fiction. And if they want to go with that as a reality, I don't think it's necessarily inconsistent with anything, so go for it. I'll go with it. I actually thought it was really interesting. I thought it was really cool how he had all these pictures of this woman, and then she appears, and then he beams over to the ship, and he sees all these pictures that she drew of him. I think that's an interesting concept, and I like how he's sort of drawn to that ship, and he sacrifices himself in order to try to save these people because he realizes it's his destiny. It's almost Lost-like in a way. So I like that. Also, I gotta mention, by the way, anyone who's seen Prison Break, the actor who plays Wyatt is T-Bone, or no, not T-Bone, T-Bag from Prison Break, which is so weird. I realized this a while ago, but as soon as I realized it, I'm like, oh my god, that's so weird. Now, if you haven't seen Prison Break, the character of T-Bag is a despicable, he's the evil prisoner. The rest of the prisoners are good prisoners trying to break out, but he's the despicable, child molester, just totally disgusting human being that everyone hates. And it's so weird to see him play a character like Wyatt and looking much younger and prettier. And that's why it really shocked me. I'm like, that's T-Bag? Oh my god. And he also played the villain on season 4 of Heroes, if you've seen that, if you haven't seen Prison Break. And I'm sure he's been in other things as well. But that's T-Bag. That was so hard, but I actually think he does a fairly decent job. Another thing I would point out is when I did my review of The Naked Now, I said that was the only time Counselor Troy called Commander Riker Bill. I was wrong. I forgot about this. There's another time where in this episode she also calls him Bill, but apparently, as I read somewhere, that's it. Just these 2 episodes, never again. It's so weird hearing her call him Bill. It's Will, goddammit. But anyway, I don't know if this is the first episode that he calls her Imzadi. I think he might have mentioned it in Encounter for a Point. I can't remember. Maybe it was this episode. I don't know. But anywho, it is interesting to note that Riker and Troy will in fact get married, but that will be decades from when this episode takes place. But so let me talk about Loaxan and Troy, because I've heard some people who hate this episode mainly because of her. They find her annoying, grates on the nerves. Honestly, I didn't find her that bad in this episode. She is annoying, but, she's meant to be annoying. And to me, she's not a get off my screen type of annoying. She's a funny kind of annoying. I think they overdo it, and then her next appearance, the Manhunt, which, did I call it the Man Trap before? It's Manhunt. But anyway, Mantrap is that stupid McCoy episode from the original series. But anywho, Yeah, they overdo it in Manhunt, and that episode is absolutely horrendous. That's terrible, but I'll cover that when I get to season 2. But here, she's actually kind of funny. Like the scene where, like how arrogant she's being. Like I actually think that's a humorous character trait. Maybe other people, because their arrogance is like over the top. Like I usually hate arrogant characters in fiction. Like that's why I hated Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones. But when it's just this ridiculous and over the top, it's just funny to me. Like, and she starts with the whole like saying the sacred chalice of reeks, the heir to the holy rings of Beta Zen, and all that bullshit. I don't know. I kind of find it funny, and I found the opening scene where she says to Picard, "Oh, you may carry my luggage," and she's like walking down the hall with the corridors with this heavy ass bag, and struggling, and eventually, like Deanna loses her shit. It's like, this is enough, mother. This has gone on far enough. If Mr. Holmes the valet, then valet, and he just picks it up like easily, like it was nothing. I love Mr. Home, by the way. He's just such a funny character. And I didn't realize, and I think this is the only episode they ever did this, but I forgot that they pull a Silent Bob with Mr. Home. Now, of course, this episode came out a decade before, Silent Bob was a thing. But if you don't know what I mean by Silent Bob, it's God, I can't remember the dude's name. But the director, God, why am I brain farting on his name? This is going to really haunt me. But anyway, the director who did like Clerks and Chasing Amy and Mallrats and Dogma and Jay and Silent Bob. So Silent Bob was a reoccurring character in those movies and many more movies. And they would, not always, but a lot of the times, especially in Clerks, his first appearance, they would do this gag with him where he was completely silent at the entire film, and at the end of it he says one word of dialogue or one line of dialogue. A couple of movies he has like a couple lines of dialogue. Kevin Smith. God damn it, I knew I'd come up with it. Kevin Smith is the name of the director. Anyway, so they pull a Silent Bob with Home because in this episode he's completely silent for the whole episode. Even when Data talks to him, he just goes like, which I thought was kind of funny. But at the end, because you think he couldn't think, but at the end he just goes to Picard. He's like, "Thanks for the drinks." I thought that was cool. I thought that was a cool sound. In fact, they kind of overdid it with Silent Bob, and I think they even made fun of themselves at one point for how they always do that. But I actually like it here. Yeah, with Mr. Home, I think it's actually really funny, and I think this character is kind of funny. Now, the Millers. The whole feud with the Millers and the Wax Santa was a bit silly. And I didn't always like it, but it never annoyed the hell out of me. Like apparently it does with some people. Like, I love the dinner scene, by the way. When, she's like constantly like just nagging, being arrogant and whatever, and just nagging at the Millers, and they're just bickering back and forth, and then eventually she has that like plant that's like an animal, and she says, "Oh, do you like pets?" She's like, "Oh, love them, of course." And then the plant like touches her arm, she freaks out and goes, "Ah!" And that's when like Deanna loses her shit, and it was like, "Everyone stop it with the petty bickering, especially you, mother." And she just knocks that gong. I love that gong was funny as well. It sort of added to the like nerve-wracking nature of Wax and Troy, how Mr. Home was like just hitting that gong, going dong throughout the whole dinner, just randomly. And I love how, like, Deanna Troy did, like, when she finally got fed up with their bullshit, which she did have bullshit. And I think it was actually, and there's a rare episode where we actually do see Deanna call her mother out on her bullshit. And I thought that was a great moment. And she was like, especially you, mother, and just knocks the Kong over on her way out. And then the best part of this scene, which I'm sorry, I got a real kick out of this. I thought this was really funny. Is as soon as she leaves, Data goes, "Can you continue with the petty bickering? I find it most intriguing." Oh, that's hilarious! It's so good. What the fuck is up with Tasha Yar's hairstyle? This is something my sister first pointed out to me when we were watching it as kids. And you see, it's just like really like, I guess, sticking straight up. I don't know. It's like an Elvis hairstyle. I don't know. But anyway, I thought that was a funny scene. I liked the scene where Wyatt went to Loxana and she was like encouraging him to do what he needed to do while, being petty at the same time. So yeah, she was definitely annoying in this episode, but she never grated on my nerves. I actually found most of it funny. And maybe with age, I've learned to appreciate Loxana and Troy more, because I remember when I was younger, I used to hate her. But yeah, don't worry though. I will complain a lot about her when we get the manhunt. But this episode, I thought she was fine, actually. And I think the love story, the Terralian plague and the psychic connection with Wyatt and what's-her-face, kind of interesting. Now, one other thing I want to talk about is that this is, of course, the first time they mention the Betazoid weddings and to how it's everyone goes naked. This will be a reoccurring theme that's brought up in Star Trek a lot. It's also brought up in a lot of novels, I think. I think there's this one novel that even talked about how Riker went to a wedding naked when he was a young lieutenant or whatever. And how just the difference of how Betazoids are different because they are telepathic and they can read people's thoughts, and how also leads to Loxana being really open. This is the first time they introduced that concept, and how she wants everyone to go naked at the wedding, but they compromise, or only a couple guests go naked. I think that actually makes things worse, because wouldn't it make those guests more uncomfortable, like that they're the only ones naked and everyone else gets to wear clothes? I don't know. I think you should either wear clothes or go naked. This half-ass thing, compromise, actually doesn't make any sense to me. But anywho, so yeah, I kind of like this episode. So first of all, I want to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting my own Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It helps the channel thrive. I am really humbled that you want to support my channel. So we have Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Manigester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelicio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howes. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Brandon Neal Howes. That says, Haven, another shitty episode, noteworthy for the introduction of Loxana Troy, the telepath who never shuts up. I hate this episode and this character. She is self-important, malicious, spiteful, and so me. I want to tear my hair out, and everybody is lusting after her, apparently. I have not come across a female character so annoying since The Mother-in-Law in Bewitched, and that started airing in 1965. The planet Haven, like the cities of the 37s and Voyager, is too beautiful to be shown. Why does Deanna have to give her job and leave the Enterprise if she marries Wyatt? I thought the enlightened humans of the 24th century had learned to put aside emotions like jealousy. I'm looking at you, Bill Riker. Of course, Wyatt's dream girl is on the Terralian ship, but who cares? Two things I do enjoy about this episode: Data being totally fascinated by the petty bickering, and Mr. Holmes' visual comedy. 2 nominations for Outstanding Hairstyles out of 10. For this episode, Richard Sabry was nominated for an Emmy Award in the category of Outstanding Achievement in Hairstyling for a series in 1988. And the music is really horrible. You know, I think I watched a review that also mentioned, it might have been Lore Runner, that also mentioned that music was terrible, which is funny because when I was watching this episode, just before I heard anyone talk about the music, I was like, I really like the music in this episode. I think it's really good. And then, funny enough, everyone talks about how horrible it is. And there was like certain moments where I actually thought this is like the best music of this show so far. Because usually I've hated the music, particularly in episodes like Code of Honor. That music was horrendous. But this music, I'm kind of into. Like most of the first season episodes I've seen, even the good ones, music was really cheesy. But here, it's still a little cheesy, but I think it kind of works. So, I don't know. I don't know why other people point out how terrible the music is. Like, particularly, like, when Wyatt, like, beams over to the ship and they have the suspenseful music, and then when he's, sees the woman of his dreams, like the music they play sort of like uplifts. I don't know. I think, and particularly, when he has that scene where he's talking to his mother once he's on the Terralian ship, it's like really is like, it's hard to say, but it's really like emotional, sort of sends the emotion. That's part of why I like the storyline is the music. But anyway, that's just me. I know I'm very different on this episode overall. But the hairstyling, getting an Emmy for a hairstyle after that ridiculous hair Tashiar had, what the hell? Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, this is another episode that's so forgettable that I almost forgot that it exists. This is the episode that introduces Troy's mom, and the whole premise of the episode is boring, and I didn't care. I mean, really, this episode didn't add anything in my opinion. I always fall asleep on this episode, and the guest character who at first was going to marry Troy, then all of a sudden this woman that was in his dreams and he paints just shows up, and he immediately ditched Troy for her. I found that so unbelievable. I'm sorry. My rating is a 3 out of 10. Another bad episode. You know what? I will say one thing. Troy was actually much hotter than the woman that showed up. At least that's my opinion. I guess she looks a bit too 80s for me. She has the 280, the fluffy 80s hair, and I don't know. It doesn't really actually look attractive to me. So if I were Wyatt, I would have been like, you might have dreamed you, but Troy's actually hotter. But maybe I'm superficial. Or maybe that's just me. I don't know. So anyway, my rating for Haven out of 10. God, I'm torn between a 6 and a 7. I know either one people are going to think is too high regardless. You know what? I want to give this episode a 7. A 7, very good. I think that I like the plot with the plague ship. I think some of the humor, particularly with the accent of Troy, works. You have that great moment with Data saying, can you continue this petty bickering? And I love Mr. Holmes, especially in this episode more than any other. I thought he was really funny. And there's some plot holes, but none that really bother me. Like, I'm willing to go with it and hand wave shit away to be like, The story's interesting enough for me to hold my attention. I like the whole thing and why it being connected to this one from Dreams. I thought that was interesting. So I know I'm very different, not just from my Patreon supporters, but from apparently the majority opinion that hates this episode. And as I said, I even like the music. I do think this is the best music we got in this season so far. But yeah. And I think, again, it was Dennis McCarthy, who I talk about in later seasons how I love his music. But anyway, I'm a weirdo. I don't know. I don't know why I like this episode and everyone else doesn't. I don't know. I don't think it's great, but I think it's decent. That's just me. So anyway, that is it for my review of Haven. So coming up next on my channel, let's see here. So Thursday, of course, I'll be doing my review for the latest episode of Strange New Worlds. Saturday, we'll be back for another TNG episode with The Big Goodbye. And then Monday, another TNG review with Data Lore. So that's what's coming up next on my channel. So be sure to check out my channel so you can keep up with all of that. And I also cover many other shows and many more Star Trek videos. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.